I'm excited today to have Jeremy Slate on the show. Jeremy is the founder of the Create Your Own Life podcast, which studies the highest performers in the world. Jeremy studied literature at Oxford University. He specializes in using podcasting and new media to create celebrity, and he was ranked number 1 in the business category and number 78 in the top 100. He was also named the number 1 podcast to listen to by Inc. magazine in 2019, as well as being named a top influencer by Forbes magazine. So all of that, after all of that success in podcasting, Jeremy and his wife, Brielle Slate, founded Command Your Brand that helps entrepreneurs get their message out by appearing as guests on podcasts. Jeremy, thank you so much for being my guest today on Go for Launch.
Hey, Brandon, I'm stoked to be hanging out with you today, man.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I always ask people first and foremost, where are you in the world today?
So I am in Nuevo Jersey right now. I'm in New Jersey.
All right.
But I'm going to be heading up to Lake Placid, New York tonight because we're going to do some skiing this weekend.
Nice. Man. Excellent. Yeah. Get a couple runs in before.
We don't have many left, man. We're quickly running out of snow here.
That's right. We're recording this late March of 2021. So get away from the COVID germs for a couple days and go grab some skiing. That would be awesome.
We all wear masks anyway out there. So who cares, right?
True that. Exactly. Well, man, this is going to be fun. So Jeremy, tell us a little bit about your background and specifically, how did you get started in podcasting?
Yeah. So crazy enough, man, like my college degree, I have an undergrad degree in Catholic theology, and then my master's is in early Roman Empire propaganda, like not something that like they're hiring for a lot of jobs in.
Yeah, but it's perfect for podcasting.
Yeah, man, I'm a super nerd. I love it. Yeah. And I had like a weird accident when I was 19 where I tore 3 major ligaments in my knee and the anesthesia didn't go well. And I actually got last rites and everything, but it didn't change my life at all. At 24 though, I almost lost my mom and she had a really, really bad stroke. And it kind of like hit me that, like life was this thing that could end at some point in time. And I realized I wasn't really making a huge impact in the world. So I looked at like, what did I want to do with life? And I'd been a podcast listener since, I'm trying to think like 2008 or something like that. I had a college professor that got me into this podcast called the No Agenda Show, where they just make fun of the news. It's great because it kind of makes the world seem a whole lot less threatening, but somewhat interesting at the same time. And I, went into several different businesses after leaving my teaching job. I did network marketing full time, which wouldn't recommend anybody like kind of quit their solid job and be like, hey, so I'm going to go sell people stuff like that. Then I went from there to selling life insurance, which I was really good at. But honestly, it's kind of at least for me, it was a morbid experience day to day to tell people that they were going to die and they needed to buy this thing because of that. Yeah. So I could only do that for a little bit. And I moved from there to private labeling and selling products on Amazon. But there's like a checkbox when you put up your product listing that says, leave this promo code on my listing. So I checked that box and lost all my products for $1 in about 20 minutes. Oh, and that was the end of my Amazon business. So I started a podcast literally because I failed at everything. I loved podcasts and I even failed at the first version of it. The first version was called Rock Your Life. We had about 100 downloads in 90 days and I had 45 episodes. You can see how many people were listening to me.
Yeah. And hey man, we've been there and done that.
Yeah. So I started this show in 2015, a year after that one failed, called Create Your Own Life. And it's been amazing, man. We've had 10,000 listens in our first 30 days, and I've gotten to talk to so many of my heroes.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. We'll get more into that because I see that you put out 3 shows a week, which is
I'm busy.
Stellar, man. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're not doing it all, hopefully, but we can get into more of the nitty gritty for people who are real super interested in this stuff, which hopefully everybody is. But, Jeremy, how long did it take once you got that, better show under your feet for you to get to the point where you felt like your podcast was successful? And by what criteria were you measuring success?
Well, I guess initially I felt like it was successful because, once again, I didn't really know any podcasters. I didn't really know anybody that had a show or anything like that. I started it because I liked them. So it seemed like 10,000 was a sizable number. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm doing okay. And I also had a lot of success in getting a lot of people to say yes to the show, which is a really big deal as well. But it didn't mean I was making money or anything like that. It was just, this initial attention and stuff like that. So I'd say probably about 6 months into that when I had somebody that I knew very well say to me, hey, can you do that for me? And that was the first business that we started called Slate Media Productions, where we did like a done for you podcast model, including getting somebody on shows to promote their brand new show. So about 6 months in is where I kind of started to feel like this was something. But as an interviewer, honestly, I did about 200 shows until I felt like I was a good interview. And it's something I'm continuing to work on every day. So there's two different perspectives on that, right? There's the attention and the actual business side of it. But then there's also like me and how I was performing in interviews as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes people, and you talk to people like John Lee Dumas, who's done, gosh, thousands of interviews now, probably.
Yeah.
And even he would say, 6 to 8 months in, he probably felt like he was still a newbie.
Yes.
And you just got to continue. It's a craft.
You got to commit for at least a year, Brandon. Like seriously,
Totally.
a lot of people are like, all right, I did 20 shows. I'm not rolling in the money. What's happening? But you got to commit for a year, man.
Yeah, a lot of people have this misconception that, man, you just start a podcast and everybody's going to flock to it. Not the case unless you're already an A-list celebrity or possibly a B-list. But, if you have a big list to start with, yeah, people will be interested in seeing what you have to say. But if you're just, quote, nobody starting out, man, you're going to have a little bit harder road to hoe. But you mentioned the big magic word a minute ago, Jeremy, money. People also think, oh, podcasts, I can make money. So you talked about, at this point in time, after about 6 months plus, you started making some money because you were monetizing it, selling services. Are there other ways that you're now monetizing your own podcast? And also when you appear as a guest on other people's podcasts?
Well, there's two different viewpoints on that. Like the first one I was doing some flat rate advertising. Like I had, because yes, we were getting listens, but we weren't doing enough where, a CPM or, a cost per 1,000 downloads could make us money. And just for people, if they don't know what that is, in the advertising world, especially with podcasts, they'll pay you a set dollar amount for thousands of views. So for every 1,000 views, you get like $18. So you got to have a lot of views to make any money. And that's how a lot of these big shows make money, is through advertising. So we were doing okay, but we weren't doing that. So what I basically did is I approached a lot of advertisers I liked, and I said, okay, so for $75, we do a flat rate. You can just have a spot in the show. So initially I was making some money that way. And also at the same time, we were working with a lot of affiliate offers. So, and I still work with till this day is Audible, because I'm always telling my audience what book I'm reading. And basically they pay you to give away a free membership to somebody, because I guess their retention must be so high once somebody gets that free membership. So that's been really, really good. And then we've also done some high ticket stuff with our guests. Sometimes a guest has a high ticket product and things like that, and you can make a percentage off there. So that's one of the ways that you can make money off a podcast. But honestly, Brandon, like for me, the way that I see the home run and where I think this fits is a podcast is really something that promotes everything else you're doing, right? If you're in the digital marketing world, it makes you seem like more of a digital marketing expert. If you're in the personal development world, it makes you seem like more of a personal development expert. And it also connects you to the thought leaders in that area. So I think that's the viewpoint people really need to have on this, is how can this make whatever I'm doing more effective and help to enhance my celebrity in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, people hear these words a lot, like thought leader, influencer, of course, celebrity, sort of like a tiered effect, right? But can you talk about the differences that you perceive between those three things alone, being a thought leader, an influencer, and a celebrity, and kind of the steps that would take, normal people to aspire to any of those three?
Well, you mentioned in the beginning, like lists, like A-list celebrity, B-list celebrity. When I started this, dude, I was like an E-list celebrity. I was below D. Like my parents barely knew who I was. So like the thing I want people to understand is we all start in different places, and you have to really understand where you are when you start, because you're not going to help yourself if you think like, you're more important than you are, or you're less important than you are. You have to really understand where you're at. So I think that's kind of the first piece of advice I would give to people. And I don't think there's a major difference between like the idea of a thought leader and a celebrity and an influencer, because here's the thing, right? A thought leader, they're known for something in a certain area, right? They're leading people's thoughts. And an influencer is influencing people to do something based on the content they're putting out there. And a celebrity is well known. So I think really, if you're doing it right, you are all three of those things.
Yeah.
And the way you really do that is by getting in front of the right niche markets. I think too often people are like, and we see this especially with clients that come to us and like, all right, so I want to go on Joe Rogan. I want to go on Lewis Howes. I want to go on this. And I'm like, dude, you're not to be mean, but you're not anybody yet.
Yeah.
And I want to help you, and you have to start somewhere. And so you have to take a look at, is this about impact, or is this about my ego? And a lot of times that's something you have to knock out of the way right away, because if it's about impact, you need to niche. You need to get in front of the exact type of audience that you need to be in. Like if you are, in the careers world, and you'd want to be just in front of people that care about careers. If you're in front of the digital marketing world, and even you can go more specific within that, right? Because you can go into SEO, or you can go into copyright, you can go into things like that. So you really want to niche down And I always tell people you start small to get bigger. And that's really where the thought leadership comes in, because you become known for that specific thing. And as your influence grows, you can grow your business, you can make bigger impacts, you can then push that influence and you're doing other things like writing books and growing your business. So that's really what I look at it as, is doing it right is all three of those things, but you also have to be honest with yourself of where you start and realize, is this about impact or ego? And that's a really big deal.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jeremy. And it helps to have that mindset going in that, not necessarily that I want to be a celebrity, but I want to act like one in my space.
Correct.
And you kind of hit the nail on the head that the people that niche down seem to be more, influential and perceived as bigger thought leaders. Typically, one of the people that comes to mind always for me is Neil Patel, right? If you talk about SEO, man, that's the dude, right?
Ooh, he is a smart dude when it comes to that. I literally was just talking to somebody else about Neil Patel and SEO like literally an hour ago.
Yeah, and not to knock him on everything else, because he's super good at social media. He's really good at content. He's good at a lot of things, but it's always wrapped around the SEO, which he's been doing for a long time. But he's branched out. He's gotten good at video, podcasting, lots of stuff. The guy is amazing, right?
But he started small. And that's the key aspect to what you're saying there, is you start with one thing and you can branch out once you get some notoriety, but you can't be everything to everyone or you're nobody to anybody. You got to start small, get known, and grow off of that.
That's right. So what are some ways, Jeremy, to position yourself as a go-to expert in any given space?
So the thing first and foremost is, and this is kind of something we've been hitting on here, is like, what is that unique thing that you do? What is the differentiating thing that we do? Because I find so many times people just start ripping off other people. You know what I mean? They're I'm going to be like Brandon, or I'm going to be like John Lee Dumas, or I'm going to be like Grant Cardone, rather than, okay, what do you think? What do you know? What are you good at? So you really have to differentiate first and foremost, because if you don't differentiate, you're promoting everybody else that does what you do, because you're promoting that space rather than promoting yourself. So that's the key aspect, is really differentiating first and foremost and helping people to understand how you're different. And then you have to determine, what is your medium? For me, it was podcasting. And honestly, because like I said, I have a master's degree in history, there were not many people that could understand the things I was writing. I'm a good writer now because I've learned how to write, on a more basic level. But for me, podcasting was the way I could communicate. And it was a medium I was interested in. Maybe for this person listening, it's not your medium. Maybe it's YouTube. Maybe it's blogging. But find out what your medium is and really start writing deep in that area. And I always tell people you need to find out who the thought leaders are in that area. And that's why I think podcasting is honestly perfect for that, because you can interview a lot of those people that are known in that area. And every time you interview somebody that's known in that area, your thought leadership grows, because you're benefiting from something called positioning. And that is when you're being seen for or against something, you're grabbing that position that's already in somebody's mind. I know it annoys me, but people always say, well, we're the Uber of blank, or we're the Netflix of blank. But people are trying to get that positioning, right? They're trying to get that place in people's minds that's already there so that they can, be seen in that way and not be forgotten. So that positioning is vital. But the other thing is, going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, is what are you known for and what are you talking about? That's why I say, even if you have a podcast that interviews people, you mentioned that I have a show 3 days a week. Well, on Fridays, I usually have an interview I've done elsewhere, a speech from history because I'm a history nerd, or something I learned during the week. Because what you really want to do is have a content piece from you, because if it's just guests, and you're not building your own thought leadership and people aren't staying for you. So That's really what you need to think about. And that's why I think podcasting is the first perfect medium for that. Now, you can do that in other places. I just feel like that being seen and heard is a lot more impactful than other mediums.
Yeah. And another thing you mentioned earlier, Jeremy, and I've certainly found this in my experience podcasting, is it's an amazing entree. I mean, you can call up people in your space, high up the chain, and typically they will be very accommodating, I've found. And some big A-list names, will come on your podcast. Even if you're small, I've only had a handful of people over hundreds of shows actually ask me, how many downloads do you get? Or, who listens to your show? Most of them are just like, yep, tell me when and where, and I'll show up and I'll do it for half an hour. It's amazing. What have you found?
Well, the thing that's interesting about that is I found too, that it's a bit of, you mentioned getting that high level guest. Once you get a few, it's much easier to get more without ever talking about downloads, right? Because you've added that credibility by the people you've spoken to. So I think that's really vital. But I find when you're reaching out for guests, especially if they're in your area, you always want to lead with purpose. Like, what is the purpose I'm doing this? You want to lead with what's in it for them, because I find far too often when people write a pitch, it's about what's in it for me, and they don't care what's in it for you. They have a lot of opportunities. So, purpose, what's in it for them. And then you want to talk about the credibility of who have I spoken to, because that does really, really help you. Now, if you're early on in your journey and you haven't spoken to anybody yet, one of the things I did is I made a list of the top 100 people I most admire. And you kind of take a flyer on the first few and you hope. Yeah. Once somebody says yes, you can then add to their interview schedule. It doesn't mean you have to have done it yet. So then that credibility helps you with getting more. And that's how I had a lot of success early on. So there's a way you can go about it to get people to say yes that enhances your credibility. And once you get to a certain point where you've had a bunch, they start reaching out to you. And that's the really, really interesting part. Is I've had a lot of people that I admire inbound reach out to me, because we've had a lot of people that they know and they see and they trust.
Yeah, that's so funny you say that, because actually your publicist reached out to me, which I get a lot of pitches at this point for people that want to be on the show, right? But I remember in the first days, man, looking and going, I want to interview so-and-so. So you'll appreciate this. My very first guests, I guess, were John Lee Dumas and Kate Erickson, his girlfriend. Now,
damn, well done,
engaged,
man.
Right? Very nice. But, I reached out to them. I think it helped that I had already bought a product from him. So I was kind of, using the guilt factor, like, hey man, I am a customer. But it was, we were going to social media marketing world. This has been 4 or 5 years ago. And I pitched him and said, hey, I'm going to be there too. Would you be willing to be interviewed? And he said, yeah, I'll give you 15 minutes at the opening night party. And if you've ever been to social media marketing world, I don't know if you have, but they have
you're lucky if you're going to find a quiet spot there for a microphone, man.
There is no quiet spot, Jeremy.
Exactly.
They do it on a retired aircraft carrier in San Diego, California. So imagine you're going on this aircraft carrier and there's literally thousands of people milling around, open air, unbelievably loud, incredibly difficult, to find a place. But nevertheless, we found a spot, we recorded it. And that was #1 episode. So from then, to now, like I said, I've started to get people pitching me. And so we're going to talk about that in a minute, because that's something that people totally overlook. But before we get there, I want to ask you, I'm real curious for you. What do you attribute your personal success with podcasting to?
It's interesting, because I have always been somebody that's been a really good student. And when I became a teacher, it just didn't really work for me, because I don't know. I feel like people feel like that natural progression is like, once you've loved to learn, you love to teach. And it just wasn't that way for me. And I think that's why I've been so successful in podcasting, because I've actually found a way to continue being a student at a really high level. But because of the way the medium is, I'm also a teacher. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that's why it's worked really, really well.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I do it, because I love talking to people like you. I meet cool people. And we have conversations, and I'm trying to elicit value. I'm giving you a platform as well, but you're giving me valuable information. I'm taking notes most of the time too, right? And I'm telling, and people are like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, no, I'm like, it's a mutually symbiotic relationship, right? You want to reach out to other people that may not have heard of you, which is crazy if no one's ever heard of Jeremy Slate, right? But
there's a lot of people that have no idea who I am, man. Like, you're being too kind.
So, you're going to reach like 4 more people, after, no, but so, and the same thing, like people are going to say, when you promote this, man, I never heard of Brandon Utley Go for Launch. That's cool that you were on this guy's podcast, right? Because you're going to totally promote it after the fact. But
yes,
but anyway, it's just an amazing platform, like you said, and we're preaching to the choir, but I want to talk a little bit more about the guesting aspect in a minute. But before that, I was real curious about you and your wife, Brielle, started this company, Command Your Brand. And according to your show notes, you grew that almost over 70% in a down economy. What principles did you guys apply that others can learn from who are listening to the show?
So #1, it's having really good processes. I'm maniacal about taking, like documenting every single thing you do, because I don't know if you found it this way, Brandon, like I usually create a job in my company first, which means that I know how it functions. So as somebody running the business, if something's happening there, I know how to give the correct order to fix it. Like that's just really important to have that control point. But for me, I'm doing 2 ways. I put out a Google Doc and I write up absolutely everything. And I'm also doing screen recordings. Now, the part where people screw up doing screen recordings is they'll do like a full hour training. The problem is if you ever change a part of the process, you have to do that whole damn video again.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually do them in chunks of, 5 minutes, because it's very easy to change one thing if you change a process, because sometimes things get a little better.
Yeah.
But I've been maniacal about writing that up every single step. And when I say that, a lot of times people are like, yeah, I can write a process, but most people can't. And the reason that I say that is they assume people know things at the beginning of the process. You can never, even if somebody's an expert in your area you're bringing on, you can't assume they know anything. So you write up every single thing that needs to get done, and you'll find that there's things you weren't even thinking about that are part of what you're doing. So I'm maniacal about process. I'm maniacal about documenting. And the other thing is, when the economy changed, we were growing, like we were having a good year, but we said, okay, like there's a lot of people out of work right now. Let's hire. And it was a really good time to hire and actually hone our hiring process too. And that helped us continue to charge forward. I think a lot of people, when the world got kind of funny, they collapsed in a lot of ways, and it's not because their income dropped. Like I know people, their income dropped, but they started like letting staff go. It's like, why, guys? So they looked at their projections and they kind of held back. I looked at that and I said, okay, there's an opportunity here. There's a way to grow. Let's go out and hire. So, we jumped from 6 staff last year to 15.
Wow.
And that's really helped us to do a really great job. And it's really powered us into this year.
That's awesome. Well, you mentioned process, man. I'm a huge process freak myself. I use a lot of different tools, but interestingly, for this podcast, for years, I've been using something called Process Street, which is a killer software where you can just constantly tweak and
we
refine.
Actually did an episode on Process Street.
Yeah.
I had a guest on that. She actually goes into companies and builds processes.
Yeah.
And she uses Process Street to do it. It's a great product.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's killer. I use it with this podcast so that, I can do it in my sleep, probably like you can. You just know the 35 steps, for every, there's like, we're on step 5.
There's definitely a lot of steps.
Oh my God.
Man.
It's like, yeah, step 5 is record the podcast, but then there's so much other crap before and after. But in any event, I'm constantly refining that, like, maybe I don't need to do this step, or I can do this differently and shave off a couple of minutes here and there. So it's good stuff. And then ultimately you want to pass that off and give it to somebody, train them and say, follow these steps, and the podcast will come out flawlessly at the other end. But
I'll tell you what to that as well. Like one of the best things I did was bring on a production team and a booking team. Like, oh my gosh, it frees you up. But also at the same time, I've tried to, empower them in a certain way. Cause I know a lot of times people can be like, stingy about what they want. I'm somebody that show me how it's done and show me what it looks like. And if it's better, let's do it. And that's created a lot more, like they've created better graphics. They've created better ways to edit. They've created better ways. But I think sometimes people get so stuck in, well, this is exactly how I want it done. Whereas I'm more like, show me an example. I'll let you know if I like it. If I like it, we can do it. And that type of viewpoint has really helped me to get better products out of my team.
You got to mix it up occasionally too. Like I love Tim Ferriss, but my gosh, for years he's had the same intro, and all that. And I remember hearing an episode that he did with somebody years ago where they actually produced a new intro for him, which was cool. And I'm like, well, of course he'll start using that now. And he didn't. He like fell back on the sword of, oh, this is what I know and like and trust. So I'm just, but I'm like, man, but I guess to his credit, Tim Ferriss is the master of process. So once he has done it one time, he probably doesn't go back and do it again, maybe years later. But anyway, we digress a bit. Let me ask you about, brands that haven't taken advantage of podcasting yet. To me, there's 2 main flavors of podcasting. And the first is very obvious, but it kind of seems daunting to most people. And that's actually to start your own podcast. So when people think of podcasting, they go, oh, man, I don't know. That just seems crazy complicated. I don't want to do it. But the second option is much less obvious to people for surprising reason, which is to simply be a guest on other people's podcasts, which you guys are helping people do now. So Jeremy, what do you advise your clients on the best approach to take if they're trying to figure out what to do to take advantage of podcasting?
So number one, it goes back to the thing we said much earlier in this interview, and that's understanding, like, when you're going to go on a show, is this about impact or ego? And you're going to find a lot of the things you're demanding right away about ego. So stop doing those. So you really want to find out exactly who you have to be in front of. And that's vital, because if it's the right people to hear your message, the audience does not have to be big in order to make an impact. And the way I always explain this to people, like, even if a podcast gets 100 downloads, right? Think of a time you were in a room giving a talk to 100 people. That's a lot of people to be in a room with, right? So if that's within that niche, that's a really big deal. So that's key as well. Then the other thing is also how you show up. Like, you want to show up in a way that you're willing to serve that audience, and it's not just all about you. But there's so many people that they show up and they're like, all right, so I need this number of sales, I need this number of conversions, I need this number. And when you show up that way, like people can feel it. And it also affects the way that the interview occurs. So it's about showing up valuable and showing up willing to help, and everything else you want will happen because of that. And the other part of it is as well, knowing what a good interview looks like. And there's 3 key parts to every interview that we say. And it's every interview may be slightly different, right? But it's story, message, and call to action. Your personal story, because it creates trust and shows transformation. Your message, which is what you want people to do, like the key teachable things you want them to be able to do walking away from this. And I find this is where people screw up a lot. Well, actually, they screw up with this, and they actually screw up with the final step as well. But they screw up a lot right here because they tend to not teach everything. They say, well, check out this free resource, or check out this, or check out that, or on this page in my book. When you're up for that period of time, you want to show people how to do what you do. And then from there, the final step is call to action. And that's giving people something, a giveaway of some sort, that allows them to have a win off of what you just taught. So a good example of that is when you're going to teach, like I teach about podcasting. So I give away, a free resource that has to do with podcasting, because that does a couple different things. It gives people an opportunity to continue the relationship and come into your community. And it also gives them a win off of what you do. So now you're more of a thought leader in their head.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
When all 3 of those things line up, you have a really, really great interview. And when people are like, okay, well, that's great, but how do I work this out? I always tell people to start backwards. Start with the effect you want to happen at the end, that call to action. Take a look at what part of it, and then you move to what part of your story matches. And then you figure out how you align your teaching to that. Once you have that lined up, it's a really great interview. Now, the thing I like to add to that, because I don't know if you've had this happen before, but I had this happen once. And I was like, dude, are you reading? Like, what's happening? And don't think you have to memorize an exact way this is, because it's just going to be weird, man. You have to have it, know it down well enough. Like, it's your story, you should know it, but know it well enough. At the same time, be able to do what I call telling it through different lenses, right? If you're on one podcast, it may look through it through a different lens, whereas another podcast may look through it through a different lens. That's why it's important to know who you're talking to, what you're talking to them about, and the way they need to receive your information.
Yeah, those are great tips. Speaking of, let me talk about some pet peeves, and I want you to chime in here when it comes to having a guest on your podcast, right? So you're a podcast host, you interview people. I do the same.
Yeah.
Here's the main things that really annoy me, and make sure you're good on time. We're still good for a couple more minutes. I want to be.
No, I'm good, brother. Let's keep going.
Let's do it, man.
And my Wi-Fi signal has held up since I'm not in my office today, so this is good.
Yeah, so far so good. All right. So first of all is when I get generic or off-topic requests, which happens all the time, and it's totally clear that you haven't even listened to my show, like probably once. And so even if you put the generic, like, I love your show, man, and I'm a big fan.
Oh, I hate that.
No,
I'm a big fan of show name here. You're not, liar.
Like, no, you're not, because I can tell, because now you're pitching me on cat food or something like totally wrong and totally not, I talk to entrepreneurs. I talk about marketing. I talk about cool technology and stuff like that. I don't talk about raising kids or whatever, right? That's awesome. But you got
to that effect, Brandon, have you ever seen this happen where somebody like takes all these emails and like throws them in like a MailChimp or something, and they like mess up and they still leave the name tags on there? You know what I mean? They mess up and they leave the name tags on there. It's like, dear F name, or dear first name fix or something like that. You're like, no,
it's worse.
Like, it's so bad, man.
Now, so second one, and kind of related to that, is pitching me and saying, hey, my name's Jeremy. I am an awesome individual. You should totally go check me out on all these places and see if I'm a good fit for you and let me know. I'm like, dude, I'm not doing the work for you. You better pitch me.
That's a lot of work, man.
Like, does that happen when people are like, hey, I'm awesome, and like, here's a link, and here's all these places I've been written up in, go check me out, and you'll see what an awesome person is, and then get back to me and let me know when I can be on the show. I'm like, bing, delete.
To that effect, like when you're going to lead with a pitch, it's the first 50 characters that are most, or for 50 characters, 50 words that are most important. And I usually lead with things people have done, things people have achieved, and what's in it for you. Like, that's really, really, really important. Those first 50 words, because I don't know about you, like I get some and I know pitches can be long, ours are decently long, but those first 50 words are what we put the most attention on. So I know for me, when I get a long email, I'm like, yeah, not reading that. I'll read the first 2 sentences and that's it. So that's why you have to really concentrate on the beginning. That's where it's most important.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. You made it through my filter. So you and your
Did something right, man.
yeah, your PR people and you were doing something right because again, it showed that you had probably listened to at least one or two episodes. You said something that was relevant to me and made me understand that you kind of knew what I was looking for in a guest. You gave me some good information. So that's number 3 is when people send poorly crafted bios, a crappy photo, things like that. Not only that, I think that I love it when people send Word documents or plain text so that I don't have to like scrape stuff out of a PDF, copy and paste. There's a lot of copying and pasting going on when you're a podcast host.
Oh my gosh.
We
actually create like media kits for our clients too. Like
there you go.
we typically give like a folder and for people who don't know what a media kit is, like and there's different definitions of it, but for us, it's usually a Google Drive folder, which has in it the first document is somebody's bio, all their talking points. We also give sample questions, people don't always use them, but it's nice to know like, hey, I should ask you this. It doesn't mean you're going to go through and ask them all, but it just kind of gives you that. So that's one document with all their social links and stuff like that. Then we have several versions of high res photos because we want to give somebody options because I don't know about you, but like I hate when I'm like putting something together and the only photo I can find is like 50 by 50 pixels. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
So there's that. And then we also give them like a one pager as well. But I think so many times people try to like treat their one pager as a pitch. It's complementary to what you're doing. Like that's also what should be in a media kit.
Definitely. And another overlooked thing, which is super helpful for me, is if in that JPEG file or the PNG, you put some proper meta tags. That's super cool because when I'm going to put your picture over in WordPress later, I'm going to have it say, Jeremy Slate photo or headshot or whatever. Most people just send it over photo.jpg. I'm like, dude, there's
a whole bunch of like numbers in there or something like that.
Yeah, like super lazy. Like take 10 seconds because if I'm looking on my hard drive too, I'm like, what is this? I can't remember. So that's cool stuff. Now, once you get on the podcast, you've got to have equipment. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars, but I hate it. I had a guest the other day who was like doing this right here. Like, I'm going to be on my phone. And he's like, literally recording from his phone.
So the software I use doesn't even work on a phone. Like, so we've been using Riverside.fm for a while. And that's because it records on each side separately and sends to the cloud. So it's not recording to the stream. So you don't get like some of the weird stuff you get, but like, so that software doesn't even work on a phone. So I always let people know that ahead of time because, it's such a pet peeve for me when people show up on a phone, man.
Yeah, it turned out okay. But, that makes more work on my end because I'm going to have to balance the levels a little bit more and stuff like that. So, don't do that. Get a decent microphone, right? Yeah. It's not that hard. Like I'm using one that I favor quite a bit, an ATR 2100. There's an even better version.
ATR 2100 is like the one that you can count on to always be consistent and good.
Yeah, totally. So if you're at your, in-laws house or whatever, you're on the road, you throw it in your bag. It's a USB. This thing is like probably way less than $100, but they got a newer version. It's even better. But anyway, the last thing is, once the podcast comes out, like doing crickets, right? And you're like, I email my guests and like, here's the show, please promote it. And half the time I don't even get a thanks back. Like, it's like,
well, really? I'll be honest with you though, like at least something I've learned, like number one, you should always share a show, but number two, like something I've tried to do as a host is at the same time, you want to help people with promoting it because I think sometimes like people are just like, all right, here's a link. And it's like, we're busy. So like one of the things that we try to do as well is we actually create a lot of content pieces that we give our guests too.
Yes.
So like you also want to make it easier for people to promote you, but absolutely you should be promoting your episodes.
Yeah. And I also do try to tag people, when I'm starting to promote it myself on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, but again, that's a lot of work. So you can help the podcast host on the front end by saying, here I am on Instagram, Twitter, everywhere else, so that when I'm at that point, I can just kind of go through the checklist and go, oh, okay, Jeremy's over here. I'm going to ping him on Instagram. And
that's why your handles should be the same on every platform, by the way, if possible, because you're going to make that person's life easier.
Yeah, totally. Well, man, this has been a huge amount of information, Jeremy. We could keep talking for hours because we're two symbiotic geeks, man, like history and all this cool stuff and technology and podcasting. Come on. It's like, when can we stop? Right. But we do have to stop because I want to be mindful of people's time, commutes, etc. Let me wrap up by asking you to please share any resources, places where folks can go and learn more about you, Brielle, and what you guys are offering.
Well, we talked a lot about podcasting today and a lot about making impact today. I find like so many times, like there's some like mystery behind it, right? There's like, what am I doing wrong? What's going right? Like I made every mistake you could imagine with like trying to get on the right shows and like trying to really make an impact. So I put together an awesome free guide for people called the 7 Reasons You're Not Getting Featured on Your Favorite Podcasts. And you can get that over at commandyourbrand.com/7 reasons. And the word 7 or the number 7 will work for that.
All right. Excellent. Well, I'll have everything linked over at the show notes page at goforlaunch.io/show131. Jeremy Slate, thank you so much. This has been a super pleasure. I've been loving researching you today, learning about your near-death experience, and you've risen from the grave, man, and you're doing great things. So thanks so much for being a great guest and sharing a lot of valuable tips.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, brother.